I used to think generosity was my proudest quality. Turns out, it was my blind spot. For the last 8 years, I've been sending my son $500 a month, every month, without fail. Rain or shine, health or hospital. When he got married, I paid the deposit for their apartment. When his wife wanted to start her online boutique, I covered the first shipment of stock, $2,000. When their car broke down, I paid the repair bill. When rent went up, I quietly increased my help to cover the difference. It wasn't just the big things either. Birthdays, holidays, little emergencies. I sent money like love letters, believing each transfer meant I was still part of their lives. In my ledger, or what I call my father's heart, every payment meant I'm proud of you. Every deposit said, I believe in you. Over the years, I stopped counting. Maybe because I was afraid to see the truth written in numbers instead of feelings. But if I had to estimate, I've probably given them over Senjer Bod's Ling. That's a small fortune for a retired man on a fixed income. But I didn't mind. They were my family, my blood. What else are you supposed to do when your son says, Dad, I just need a little help this month? Then came the wedding, not just any wedding, their second ceremony, the real one, as they called it. The first was small, civil, and quiet. This one was supposed to be for family, my family. Except somehow I wasn't invited. I found out the night it happened. My neighbor Ann sent me a photo on WhatsApp. Look who I ran into tonight. It was my son, in a tuxedo, standing next to his bride under golden lights, smiling, laughing, surrounded by people I didn't even know. And there, right beneath the picture, was the caption, so happy to celebrate with everyone special in our lives tonight. That word special burned a hole right through me. I called him that night, trying to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I missed the invitation. Maybe it was stuck in the mail. He didn't pick up. Instead, his wife texted me the next morning. Hi, Mr. Langston. The event was small and private. We only invited people who were really close to us. Hope you understand. People who were really close to us. I had paid for their first apartment's deposit. I had covered their honeymoon. I had literally kept them from eviction once. And now, apparently, I wasn't close enough to watch my own son say his vows. I didn't respond. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just sat there in my kitchen, staring at my half-eaten breakfast and realizing that love, the kind I'd been giving, wasn't love to them. It was credit, it was currency. That night, I went through my old bank statements, transfer after transfer, line after line, 500 here, 800 there. I tried to remember what each one was for, but most had no reason at all, just trust. It hit me slowly, like cold water down the spine, that somewhere along the way, my relationship with my son had turned into a subscription plan. I paid to stay connected, I paid to be respected, and when I finally wasn't useful anymore, I was quietly unsubscribed. I spent that whole week in silence. I didn't tell my friends at the club, didn't answer calls, didn't even turn on the TV. The house felt heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that presses down on your dopper chest until you start questioning who you are when no one needs you anymore. You see, when my wife died 10 years ago, I poured everything into my boy. I told myself that as long as he was okay, she'd be proud of me. So I became the helper, the fixer, the rescuer. But that night, after seeing that picture, I realized something painful. My kindness had turned into their expectation, and my pride had been replaced by guilt every time I said no. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat by the window, the same spot I'd sat in for years waiting for his visits. But this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was thinking. I wrote one sentence in my notebook, underlined twice. You can't buy love that's already been sold. That was the day something in me shifted. The silence didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like recovery. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of my freedom, the moment when heartbreak quietly started turning into backbone. But the story didn't end there. In fact, that's when the real audacity began. It took them exactly 6 days to call, not to apologize, not to explain, but to ask for money. I remember it vividly. A Thursday morning, drizzle tapping against my window, my coffee still hot. The phone buzzed, and for a brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd realized how much that night had hurt me. It was my daughter-in-law. It was Mat Daughterman Polmosen daughter-in-law. Her tone was polite, almost rehearsed. Hi, Mr. Langston. Hope you're doing okay. I hate to ask this, but rent's a little overdue this month. Just a small delay with my business payments. Could you? I didn't let her finish. Is this about the same apartment I helped you move into? I asked. There was a pause. That kind of pause where you can almost hear someone recalibrating their strategy. Ow, she said slowly. We're just short for now. It's temporary. I leaned back, staring out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like tired tears. You know, I said quietly, I saw your wedding photos. Looked beautiful. Must have been expensive. Another pause. This one longer. Oh, yes, and Sarah Spratterport and Sarah Avon and Toppinger Kunder special. Yes, it was special. We wanted something small, just clothes people. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I'd finally seen it, the whole ugly picture. Well, I said, then I guess I'm not that special. You should ask one of those close people to help you with rent. And then I hung up, no shouting, no lectures, just a quiet end to a long pattern of emotional blackmail. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, that strange mix of grief and relief that comes when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to people who've already priced you. For the first time in years, I didn't open my banking app that week. No transfers, no messages that started with just this once. I sat in my chair and felt something new, silence that didn't hurt. That night, I opened an old notebook and began writing down every single time I had helped. Not to guilt myself, but to finally see it, a financial autopsy of misplaced love. January 2017, $1,200, first apartment deposit. March 2017, $500, new furniture. July 2018, $3,000, honeymoon package. October 2019, $700, car payment. December 2020, $2,400, business inventory. March 2021, $1,000, insurance. April 2022, $500, medical emergency. January 2023, $500 every month thereafter. $42,300, not counting groceries, gifts, or the small dad. Can you cover this real quick? Retrentist that never made it into my ledger. That's when the shock finally turned into anger, not the kind that lashes out, but the quiet, clarifying kind that rewires you. The kind that says, enough. I realized I'd been living in a form of emotional debt collection. Every dollar I sent was supposed to buy me a visit, a phone call, maybe a thank you. But love that requires proof of payment isn't love, it's a transaction, and I was done funding it. So I started cleaning house, literally and financially. I canceled the automatic transfers. I called the bank and removed both their names as authorized contacts. I even switched to paper statements again. Something about holding real paper made me feel grounded, like I was reclaiming my life one envelope at a time. A few days later, my son called. His voice was colder than usual. Dad, he said flatly, why'd you cancel the transfer? Because I realized something. I replied, I've been paying for a relationship that doesn't exist, he scoffed. You're overreacting. We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a wedding for special people. I cut in, I remember. He went silent. Then, in that same patronizing tone I'd once used on him when he was 16 and reckless, he said, you're making this bigger than it is. It's just money. No, I said softly, it was love. But you turned it into money. That silence on the other end, I'll never forget it. It wasn't guilt, it was irritation. Like a customer complaining their free trial had ended, he finally muttered, you'll regret this. We were counting on you, I replied. I spent $42,000 to buy my regrets, son. I think I've already paid enough. Then I hung up. That weekend, I drove out to the coast, something I hadn't done in years. No agenda, no company, just the ocean and me. I sat on a bench overlooking the gray water and thought about every sacrifice I'd made, all the times I'd said no to myself just to say yes to them. That's the thing about parents like me. We confuse love with obligation. We think the more we give, the more we matter. But when you raise someone on unconditional support, they forget what conditions even are. I remembered a line my wife once said before she passed, if you never let them fall, they'll never learn how to stand. Back then, I thought she was being harsh. Now, I understood she was just being wise. When I got home, I felt lighter, no calls, no guilt. Just me, and a kitchen that finally felt like it belonged to its owner again. I started cooking for myself again, too. Real meals, not frozen dinners or takeout. The first night I made steak and poured a glass of wine. I sat at the table for one and raised my glass to the empty chair across from me. To freedom, I said quietly. Then I laughed, a real unforced laugh, unforced laugh. Because even though I was alone for the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. But that peace didn't last long, because when users lose access to their favorite resource, they don't disappear. They escalate, and the next knock on my door would prove it. It was a Sunday afternoon, gray skies, quiet neighborhood, the kind of day when nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. I had just finished trimming the small hedge by my porch when I saw a black sedan pull up to my driveway. At first, I thought it was one of those real estate agents again, the ones who keep leaving flyers saying, "We buy homes fast." But when the doors opened, my stomach dropped. My son stepped out first, then his wife, and then a third man older in a Navy suit holding a leather briefcase. I knew exactly what that briefcase meant. They didn't even bother to call first. My son smiled, or tried to. It looked forced, stretched thin over guilt and entitlement. "Hey, Dad," he said. "We thought we'd stop by and clear the air." I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked at him. "Clear the air or collect a payment?" His wife gave a tight laugh. "We just want to talk. You've been distant. We're worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated. "You throw a wedding without inviting me, demand rent money afterward, and now you're worried?" That's when the man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Langston," he said smoothly. "My name's Mr. Keating. I'm your son's legal counsel. I'd just like to have a friendly discussion." A friendly discussion? I almost laughed. I motioned for them to come inside, not out of warmth, but because I wanted this over with. We sat around my dining table, my son and his wife on one side, the lawyer between them like a referee at a rigged game. I stayed standing. Mr. Keating opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "Your son tells me you've been under a lot of stress lately," he began. "We're concerned about your well-being, financially and mentally." I said nothing, just stared at the papers. He continued, "It's not uncommon at your age to start feeling overwhelmed. Bills, property management, medical appointments. It's a lot to handle. They just want to make sure you're protected." Protected? That word felt like a trap. He slid a document across the table. "This is a simple power of attorney. It allows your son to help manage your finances and property, just in case something happens. Standard procedure for families who care about each other." I didn't touch it. I just looked at my son. "You think I can't manage my own money?" His wife jumped in before he could answer. "No one's saying that. We've noticed things. Forgetting to call back, paying bills late, getting a little confused." I smiled. Not out of amusement, but because I'd finally reached the point where rage turns to clarity. "Confused?" I said softly. "You mean like sending you money every month while you planned a wedding without me? That kind of confusion?" They shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Langston, this isn't an accusation. It's an opportunity. If you sign this, it'll make things easier for everyone." I leaned forward, resting both palms on the table. My voice was calm, too calm for everyone, huh? "Let me guess. You manage my money, sell the house, move me into some facility, and you take care of things. Sounds like a sweet deal for you." The lawyer's professional mask cracked for a second. "That's not fair, sir." "No," I said. "What's not fair is standing in my house on a Sunday, pretending this is about concern when it's about control." My son's tone changed. "Dad, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" I walked over to my cabinet and pulled out a folder. My receipts, statements, and notes from the last few months. I've documented every transaction I've made for you two since Arts Endling eSearch T, $42,300. That's what paranoia looks like when it wakes up. His wife's face went pale. My son looked at the lawyer, who clearly hadn't been briefed on that detail. I took the papers from the table, that power of attorney, and ripped them clean in half. The sound sliced through the room. "Now," I said quietly, "get out of my house." The lawyer stood up quickly. "Mr. Langston, there's no need for hostility." "Hostility?" I said. "No, Mr. Keating. Hostility would be calling the police. This is restraint." My son's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this, Dad. You're making a mistake," I said. "But it'll be my mistake, not one you manage for me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can't do this alone forever. Don't forget that." I looked him straight in the eye. Alone is better than owned. He stared at me for a long moment, the way a gambler studies his last chip before losing it, then turned and walked out. His wife followed, red-faced and silent. The lawyer lingered a moment, as if deciding whether to say something conciliatory, but thought better of it. The door shut behind them. The house fell quiet again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a long time, breathing. The anger had passed, but what came after was something heavier: grief. Not for losing them, but for finally seeing them as they were. Parents spend their whole lives protecting their children from the world. Nobody tells you what to do when you realize it's your children you need protecting from. That night, I made myself tea and sat in my chair, staring at the empty living room. Their words echoed in my head. "You'll regret being alone." Maybe I would. But regret at least was something I could own. Dependence wasn't. I didn't know what their next move would be, but I knew they wouldn't stop there. People who lose access to control rarely walk away quietly. And I was right, because the next time they came after me, they didn't bring a lawyer to my door. They brought the law itself. The morning after they left, I woke up before sunrise, not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me had changed. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for a call, a visit, or a crisis. I was done reacting. It was time to prepare. They'd tried to paint me as mentally unfit. That was their mistake, underestimating just how lucid pain can make a man. I started by making a list, names, dates, transactions, every message they'd sent about money. The more I wrote, the more I realized this hadn't been a sudden betrayal. It was a long game I'd been too blind, or too hopeful, to see. That afternoon, I drove into town and made an appointment with an attorney. Not just any lawyer, an elder rights specialist. A woman named Carla Hayes, who looked more like a librarian than a fighter until she started talking. I told her everything, the rent demands, the uninvited wedding, the lawyer's visit. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she simply said, "We're going to make sure they never get near your assets again." We filed formal documentation of potential financial coercion. She advised me to update my will, transfer my savings into a trust with oversight, and establish a medical directive, my directive, not one they could twist. When I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: safe. Not completely, but enough to start breathing again. That night, I changed the locks, every door, every window latch. I installed cameras by the porch and driveway, linked them to my phone. I even replaced the old brass key I used to leave under the mat, the one my son probably still had a copy of. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was protection. The house started to feel different, quieter, yes, but no longer haunted. Every creak of the floorboards wasn't a reminder of absence, it was proof of solitude, something earned and owned. A few days later, the phone rang. His number. For a moment, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. "Dad," his voice came through, soft, almost rehearsed. "We've been thinking a lot. Maybe we overreacted." "Dad?" "We just want to make sure you're okay." There was a time when that tone, that counterfeit tenderness, would have cracked me, but not now. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than you think. Look, maybe we can come by." "No," I cut in. "Not anymore. I've got everything I need. You focus on your life, and I'll live mine." Silence. Then quietly, "You really mean that?" "I do," I said. "And for the record, this isn't anger, it's acceptance." He didn't know what to say, neither did I. Eventually, he hung up. When the line went dead, I stood there for a moment, listening to the dial tone fade. And for once, it didn't sound like loss, it sounded like closure. Over the next weeks, I started reclaiming the pieces of myself they'd slowly taken. I took my old car, the one they'd mocked for being outdated, and had it fully restored. I started going to a local breakfast club for retirees, sitting by the window, talking to strangers who didn't want anything from me but company. I even treated myself to a proper dinner at the restaurant my wife and I used to love. Ordered dessert, too, just because I could. Funny thing about freedom, it doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a man sitting in his own kitchen again, eating what he likes, not checking his phone for permission. For years, I'd believed that family was something you endured, no matter how much it cost you. But that night, watching the sun set over my quiet street, I realized something simple and freeing. Family isn't who shares your name. It's who respects your peace. I raised a son who thought control was love. Now I was learning finally that letting go was survival. And though I knew they weren't finished, people like that rarely are, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time, every lock, every camera, every document, every breath belonged to me. I wasn't just defending my house, I was reclaiming myself. I should have known peace wouldn't last. People like my son, they don't stop when they lose access to your wallet. They just look for another way in. It started with an unexpected knock on the door one morning, polite, measured, official. A woman stood there holding a clipboard and a badge. "Mr. Langford?" she asked. "I'm with We received a report about your well-being." For a second, I thought I misheard her. My well-being? She gave me that professional half-smile, the kind they use when they expect resistance. "Nothing to worry about, sir. It's just a routine welfare check. We got a call expressing concern that you might be struggling to manage things on your own." There it was, the word struggling. I felt the blood leave my face. It wasn't hard to guess who had made that call. My son's parting words came back like an echo. "You'll regret being alone." The investigator stepped inside, glancing around the living room, neat, clean, organized, no signs of neglect, no chaos. Just a man and the life he'd worked to rebuild. She started asking questions about my finances, my medication, my memory. I answered calmly, methodically. I even offered her a cup of tea halfway through. She seemed a little disarmed by that, maybe because she expected to find a recluse unraveling in paranoia. Instead, she found a man who knew exactly what was happening. After an hour, she finally admitted, "You seem perfectly capable, Mr. Langford, but I do need to document a few things." The report mentioned some large financial transfers. "Could you explain those?" "Of course," I said. Obingstaber Mass Stiver Folderstein, Sever Koldermeyer, I said, opening a folder I'd prepared weeks earlier with Carla, my attorney. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and as Diasser and as Drupper transfer for Mund. Inside were bank statements, receipts, copies of every transfer I'd ever made to my son, the rent, the car payments, the business loan, even the down payment for their condo, each one neatly labeled, each one signed, each one proof. I slid the stack across the table and said quietly, they weren't gifts, they were dependencies. And when I stopped paying, they started calling me crazy. She went through them slowly, her pen stilling as she read the annotations. When she finally looked up, her eyes had softened. I see what's happening here, she said, and you're not the problem. 2 days later, Carla received the formal report. The investigator's notes were clear, no evidence of cognitive decline. Subject demonstrates full financial awareness and independence. Allegation appears retaliatory in nature. Retaliatory. A word I'd never thought I'd see next to my son's name, but it fit. Carla called me that evening. You've been vindicated, she said. They tried to weaponize the system, and it backfired. But be careful, this kind of humiliation doesn't sit quietly. I thanked her and sat by the window long after we hung up, watching the light fade over the neighborhood. Vindicated, it should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like standing in the ashes after a fire you didn't start. You can breathe again, but the smell still lingers. I couldn't stop thinking about how far they'd gone. Reporting your own father to the government, to paint him as unfit, that wasn't just greed. That was cruelty refined. Yet underneath the hurt, something unexpected began to form. Not bitterness, not revenge. Certainty. They had declared war on my dignity, and this time I wasn't going to defend myself in silence. If they wanted a fight, they were about to find out that I had more than memories and regret. I had evidence, alleys, and a voice that wasn't afraid anymore. That night, I took out an old notebook, the one my wife used, to keep for bills and reminders, and began documenting everything. Every visit, every call, every lie, because if there's one thing I learned, it's this, silence protects the guilty. Domination protects the truth. I went to bed that night with the folder beside me, not as a weapon, but as armor. They'd tried to make me look crazy. Now it was time to show the world what real manipulation looked like. And as I turned off the light, a single thought stayed with me, calm, firm, inevitable, because they wanted power over me. Now they'd have to face me in court. It came in a thick white envelope, stamped Family Court of the County of Riverside. For a moment, I just stared at it on the kitchen table. I already knew what it was before opening it. My son's handwriting was scrawled across the return address, sharp, rushed, defensive. Inside, the words bled like a wound, petition for guardianship over me. My own son, the one I'd carried on my shoulders to see fireworks when he was 5, was now claiming that I was unfit to handle my own life. I read it once, then again. It was all there, carefully worded lies, erratic behavior, paranoia, declining cognition, risk to self. They wanted control, legal, financial, absolute. They wanted my house, my savings, my name. I sat down, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, but this time I didn't break. This time I felt something sharper than sorrow focus. Carla arrived that afternoon, her briefcase heavy with determination. She scanned the documents, muttering under her breath. "This is more than greed," she said finally. "This is character assassination." She began gathering our response. Bank records, letters, videos from my home security system showing me active and alert. But that wasn't all. Within a week, she uncovered something far worse, falsified witness statements. One was from my pharmacist claiming I had been forgetful with medications. Carla called him directly. The man was horrified. "They told me it was just a wellness check," he said. "I never said anything like that." Another statement came from a neighbor, except she never signed it. Her signature was forged. The pattern was clear, manipulation layered with deceit. Every piece of their case was built on sand, and Carla was ready to sweep the whole thing away. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. I'll admit, for a moment I hesitated. There was something humiliating about sitting in a small, sterile office while a stranger took notes on your every word. But when I walked in, I decided this wasn't a test. It was proof. The psychiatrist, Dr. Patel, greeted me warmly. We talked for nearly 3 hours about life, loss, the loneliness of age, the pain of betrayal. He asked me to recall dates, details, even obscure bits of math and memory. I answered each calmly, deliberately. At the end, he closed his notebook and smiled faintly. "Mr. Langford," he said, "I've met many people in decline. You are not one of them." A week later, his report arrived, cognitively sound, emotionally grounded, demonstrates full autonomy and financial literacy. Those words, so simple, so clinical, were the sharpest blade of truth I could have asked for. But the greatest evidence wasn't written on paper. It came from people who knew me, who had seen me long before this war began. My old neighbor George came forward. He helped me rebuild my porch last summer, he told Carla. We spent 3 hours doing geometry on a napkin to get the angles right. That's not confusion. That's precision. My former coworker Linda wrote a letter describing how I'd guided her through her retirement paperwork just last year. And my friend Margaret from the book club, she said it best. He's not losing his mind. He's finally using it to protect himself. One by one, they stood beside me, not out of pity, but out of recognition. They knew what it looked like when someone's own family tried to erase them. And yet, even with all that support, there were nights I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house echoed differently now. I'd look at old photographs, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and wonder when it all began to rot. When did my son stop seeing me as a father and start seeing me as a financial plan? Was it the first time I said yes too easily? Was it the moment I confused generosity for love? One night, I took out the last photo I had of the three of us, me, him, and his wife, standing outside the restaurant I paid for on their anniversary. I stared at it until the lines blurred. Then, quietly, I placed it in the fireplace. The flames took their time. They didn't roar, they whispered. I watched until the edges curled and the image disappeared, a slow, dignified burial. Because the truth was simple, the son I raised was gone. The man in his place was a stranger who'd mistaken compassion for weakness. But here's the thing about loss. Once you accept it, it loses its power over you. And in its place, something else grows. Not bitterness, not vengeance. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for recognition, that my life, my choices, my independence still mattered. Carla called the next morning, her voice steady. We're ready, she said. We'll go to trial soon. And this time the truth will have the microphone. I hung up and looked around the quiet of my home, the same walls they tried to call unsafe. But to me, they'd never felt stronger. I ran a hand across the wooden table, the same one I'd built decades ago with my wife, and whispered softly to myself, they wanted to manage me. Now they'll have to face me. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. For the first time in months, my mind was clear. No dread, no trembling. Just a strange, calm certainty, the kind that comes when you've already lost everything that can be taken. I put on the same charcoal gray suit I wore to my wife's funeral. Not out of grief this time, but out of respect for the life I'd built and refused to surrender. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see an old man under siege anymore. I saw a survivor. Carla picked me up just after 7. We drove in silence, the courthouse appearing on the horizon like some looming monument to judgment and truth. Remember, she said quietly, they'll come in playing the victims. Let them, we'll deal in facts. I nodded. Facts, I repeated. That's all I have left. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Bright lights, polished wood, that faint scent of paper and fear. My son sat across from me, his lawyer beside him, and for a brief second I almost didn't recognize him. Brahmadiskapart Naparchektan. He looked smaller somehow, not in size but in presence. His wife kept whispering in his ear, her expression rehearsed, as though she were performing for the jury that wasn't there. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I followed the ritual stand, bow slightly, sit, and then the show began. Their lawyer went first, painting me as a confused, isolated old man, vulnerable to delusion, unable to manage complex finances. He spoke about erratic decisions, about how I'd cut off my family without warning, how my mental decline had left me suspicious and combative. At one point, my son even managed to cry on cue. I just want to make sure he's safe, he said, voice quivering. He's all I have left. For a moment, I almost laughed. The irony was too thick. He said it as if I hadn't been the one keeping him safe his whole life. But I stayed silent. Carla had told me let them hang themselves with their own words. And they were doing a magnificent job. When it was our turn, Carla rose, crisp, composed, deadly, precise. She began with the financial records. Each page projected onto the court monitor. Every transfer, every loan, every so-called gift. Every so-called gift. Line by line, she built the story of exploitation with the cold accuracy of a surgeon. Then she produced the text messages. My son's tone in them was impossible to misinterpret. Yo, Dad, rent's late again. Can you cover the car insurance? Just until next month. We'll pay you back. Promise. Why'd you cancel the transfer? You know we count on that. The courtroom grew very quiet. Carla turned toward the judge. Does this sound like a man incapable of managing money? Or one refusing to be managed by it? My son's lawyer objected, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Next came the psychiatrist's report. Dr. Patel's clear clinical statement of mental competence. Then letters from neighbors and friends, each one reinforcing the same truth that I was not only stable, but perhaps more lucid now than ever before. Finally, it was my turn. Carla gave me a reassuring nod as I stood and walked slowly to the stand. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling vent. I took my oath, sat, and folded my hands on the table. The opposing lawyer smiled, the kind of smile that hides a dagger, Mr. Langford, he began. Your son says you've become paranoid, that you believe he's trying to control your life. Would you agree that you've been overly suspicious? I met his eyes. Suspicion is when you don't have evidence, I said evenly. What I have are receipts. He blinked, thrown off. And you claim your son exploited you financially? No, I said, leaning forward slightly. I don't claim it. I can prove it. He tried to push further, but the judge intervened, let him speak in his own words. So I did. They didn't want a father, I said quietly, voice steady enough to slice through the air. They wanted an ATM with my last name on it, and when I stopped dispensing money, they decided to declare me broken. You could feel the shift in the room, the kind that doesn't come from volume but from conviction. Even the court clerk stopped typing. I looked directly at my son then. I raised you to stand on your own 2 feet, I said, not to use mine as a stepping stool. His eyes flickered, guilt, anger, something tangled between them. I continued, love doesn't need receipts, control does, and that's what this is about, control. When I finished, there was no applause, no dramatic silence, just the sound of the gavel as the judge called for a recess. But in that instant, I knew the verdict was already written. When the court reconvened, the judge took his time. He leafed through the files, tapped his pen against the desk, and then spoke with quiet finality. Daughter, this court finds no evidence of cognitive impairment. The guardianship petition is denied in its entirety. He paused, glancing at my son and his wife. It appears this action was motivated not by genuine concern, but by financial interest. I advise the petitioners to reflect deeply on what they've attempted here. There it was, justice, a clean cut through months of chaos. Carla squeezed my shoulder gently. It's over, she whispered. My son didn't look at me as he left the courtroom. He just walked past, head low, his wife tugging at his arm. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Release. It wasn't triumph, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes when truth finally stands taller than lies. As I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face, warm, honest, real. And I realized something simple, almost laughable. I'd been fighting to keep what was mine, but in the process, I'd regained something far more valuable, myself. Hard bought, the new life. The court case ended quietly, but the silence that followed was louder than any verdict. For weeks, I woke up expecting another knock on the door, another letter, another accusation, but nothing came. Just the sound of morning birds, the creak of old floorboards, and the hum of peace returning home. I didn't realize how heavy the house had become until I started packing. Every corner held a ghost, not of my wife, not of family, but of obligation. The hallway where my son once demanded money, the dining room where we pretended to laugh, the living room where visits turned into negotiations. So I sold it, the big house, the yard, the years of memories tied to someone else's comfort, all gone in a single signature. Now I live by the sea. The air here smells of salt and second chances. My mornings begin with coffee on the porch, watching gulls dive through waves. No noise, no tension, just rhythm. I started painting again. At first I thought I'd forgotten how, but the brush remembered even when I didn't. Some days I paint the horizon, endless and forgiving. Other days I paint the faces I've let go of, not out of bitterness but gratitude, because letting go gave me back my hands. There's a small group that meets every Thursday at the community center, retirees, wanderers, people who also learned that peace isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn back. We talk about books, travel, loss, and rediscovery. Nobody asks what anyone's worth. Nobody measures love in loans or guilt. It's simple, it's honest, it's enough. Sometimes I hear through distant whispers that my son and his wife are doing fine now. Working steady jobs, paying their bills, figuring things out the hard way, the only way that truly teaches you. I don't wish them harm, I just hope they've finally learned the difference between help and dependence. Last night, I stood by the water as the sun went down, that quiet hour where everything turns gold before fading into blue. And I realized, I used to think losing my family was the worst thing that could happen. But what I really lost was the version of myself that kept trying to earn their love, and that That was freedom. Love that needs a price tag isn't love, it's debt. I spent years paying interest on someone else's expectations until I finally went bankrupt enough to be free. The truth is you can't buy loyalty and you shouldn't have to finance affection. Love given out of guilt isn't kindness, it's captivity. Tell me something. Have you ever had to buy someone's love or pay to keep a seat at someone's table?